Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I think we're doing better than a Swiss clock, actually, in terms of our timing. And I thank all the participants for being so sharp on time. So I'm very pleased to welcome you all, for those that have joined us and that have stayed on from the previous panels, for our final panel today as part of our working group work on education and digital transformation. In the last panel, we will focus on the broad topic of digital transformation and try to squeeze out now, just identify those areas where the experts will inform us it would be worthwhile to consider formulating original, innovative recommendations. To do that, I'm very pleased to welcome a very distinguished panel that we have for today. Can I see the next slide, please? No, actually, sorry, before presenting the panelists, let me just remind you of the objective of our work in terms of C20 informing G20. The idea is to really bring out that voice of civil society and evidence-based practices or good practices in relation to these two topics of education and digital transformation, and see how we can inform the G20 leaders as they will meet in Delhi this September. Hopefully we'll be able to have some of our recommendations figure in the declaration that will be given at that occasion. As you will know, G20 is the group of 20 biggest economies of the world with a rotating chairmanship. Presidency, India holds the presidency this year, following Indonesia last year and Brazil next year. C20 is one of the engagement groups informing the work of G20. And in doing this, we are inspired by the chair of the C20. The next slide, please. Sri Amritanandamayi Devi, or Amma as we call her, as an embodiment of compassion in action, and share this quote with you on education. Education should spread light within and outside, instill awareness and strengthen the deep bond between the student, his nation, the world, his fellow human beings, and other creatures, nature, and God. It shows the central importance of education. And what we've been discussing in the last three panels is how we can also blend in technology into education. And one of the statements I think was really interesting is to say, digitalization technology can be a divider with the increasing digital divide, but it's also at the same time a means that we have to bring everybody around the table, to provide access for those that are far least privileged in terms of access to learning resources, for instance. So I'm very pleased, as said, to have a stellar panel to conclude this day. Let me briefly introduce them to you before opening the discussion and the panel discussion after a few additional comments on my side. So to start, I'm very pleased to early morning New York call Ambassador Amandeep Singh Gill, who is Undersecretary General and United Nations Secretary General's Tech Envoy. He leads the UN's effort, and he's working in particular, and he may want to say a few more words about that, developing a global digital compact that will be presented at the Future Summit in New York next year. Besides that, Ambassador Gill is an engineer by training, and he's a pioneer, I would say, in international cooperation on the governance of artificial intelligence. And he's a passionate advocate of inclusive, responsible, and collaborative applications of data and AI to the Sustainable Development Goals. He's also passionate about education, so I know he will be able to bring in both perspectives. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. Amarendra Behara. He is the Joint Director, Central Institute of Educational Technology, National Council of Educational Research and Training. Dr. apologize for my pronunciations on occasions, Dr. Amarendra, currently is working as Joint Director at the Central Institute. He has diversified his involvement into education technology, media, particularly radio, television, interactive contents, multimedia, new media, social media, and information technologies in the education sector. Dr. Behara was associated with major research projects of educational technology scheme in India, to mention just a few examples. Dr. Behara has received an award from the then Honorable President of India for promoting ICT in education, especially the online on-air learning. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Amarendra. We look forward to hearing more from you. Then I would like to introduce Mr. Dr. Shankar Maruvada, CEO and co-founder of EKEY STEP Foundation. So Dr. Shankar is the CEO of XSTEP. He is passionate about addressing social problems at scale through technology-based tools. He is an entrepreneur and marketing professional with a wide range of experience working on large-scale projects such as the Aadhaar, India's National Identification Program, where he was the head of demand generation and marketing. XSTEP Foundation, and I hope I pronounce it correctly, focuses as its mandate on improving education for millions of children. He believes that technology should fit in with the existing constraints and habits of children, the school, and the education systems in place. Thank you again for joining. Last but not least, I'm very happy to welcome a participant from Kenya. Eric Niambaro is a consultant, partnership expert, come advisor at the STEM Impact Center, Kenya. He has been working with public and private organizations to financially support youth in pursuit of their education. He was also the head of the Secretariat for the Out of School Youth Science Technology and Innovation Program in Kenya. He was responsible for designing and launching this program in 9 countries across Africa. He was responsible for executing and implementing the STEM initiative, in particular, promoting entrepreneurial skills among the youth and fundraising to support the program. Thank you so much, Mr. Eric, to join us from Africa. It's a great pleasure to have you all here for this final panel of today. Before I go into the discussion as such, let me just quickly remind you or list the areas that we have pre-identified as possible areas where the C20 can propose, articulate meaningful recommendations. Obviously, some of them are still very broad, but the very idea of the discussion today is to see whether we can narrow this down and be more specific as required. Just as a reminder, promote digital public goods for the SDG. I think that's a big topic, and we'll hear more about that as we go. More generally, promote this inclusive and human-centered dimension of the digital transformation as it unfolds and as it sometimes feels being out of control, to be honest. The issue of access, more generally, as I already said, for the most vulnerable populations and people with disability in particular also is a key focus of our work. And then the whole discussion around how do we make sure that there is a certain quality assurance as we build our information management and digital systems. How can we make sure that standards are interoperable? I always have difficulties with this word, interoperable. And what in particular also are the ethical regulations around our digital futures? This is a big debate and there's a lot of stuff happening, but we want to see in particular how we, through our work at C20, can raise the voice of civil society organizations, which tend to be absent in these debates, And the same applies for faith-based voices around governance and ethics. And finally, as a general statement, digital accessibility as a cross-cutting theme for our work. To do this, and that's the next slide, and then I'll stop talking. I already spoke far too much. How are we going to do this? What's the purpose? So the idea is that this panel serves the purpose of working on our recommendations, get your advice, discuss what could be areas of recommendation. In particular, two sets of questions that I would like to discuss with you. One is, what specific areas of recommendation would you advise for us to work on or to take on? Maybe any specific recommendation also that you would have. And two, if these are the recommendations, if time allows, what are the key barriers to make this happen, and what a possible solution? We hope to conclude the session today with key takeaways. These key takeaways are very important, and the timing is actually very good that we have this discussion today, because we'll be working on our first draft policy document next week. In terms of modalities, with your permission, let me remind you, please, to be short. We have a set time and we want to stay within that set time. The good thing is that this is our last panel, so if we overrun a little bit, that will be manageable. And I do invite all the participants online, and I welcome them, first of all, to post their comments and questions on the chat, and we will be able to take a few at the end of this session. That being said, may I think we can take away the slides, please, Amal. And I would like to start with you, Ambassador Gill. I mean, from your position, and in this very complex and growing space of digital transformation, which of course is something we struggle with as a group, what are the areas, where do you see areas where we should work on in particular? And thank you for joining us this early in New York.
Thank you, Joost, Dr. Monks. Good morning to everyone, and thank you to the organizers for this invitation. This is a unique opportunity when India follows Indonesia, and then Brazil and South Africa follow India. So 4 large developing democracies undergoing a deep structural transformation in terms of both the economic aspects as well as the social side of transformation. And the opportunity is in putting the concerns of the global South right at the center of international discussions, putting sustainable development and the sustainable development goals, whose midterm review we will be conducting this year in New York, at the center of international policy discussions at a time when geopolitics is challenging. Now, this panel addresses the issue of digital transformations and education. We don't use the word transformation lightly. And the digital aspect means that digital technologies are cutting across various sectors of our economy, of our society in an unprecedented manner. And this is happening in 2 waves. There is the initial wave that started in the 1970s. Microelectronics, chip making took off. A lot of electronic devices came into our lives, transformed entire industries. And then the second wave that started at the turn of the century with the World Wide Web, internet, and big data flows contributed to that earlier wave of transformation and took it in new directions, created entirely new business sectors. And we are not done with it yet. In fact, the capabilities that are emerging over the past couple of years, the new use cases that are emerging, show that this wave will only strengthen. And this wave is built entirely on the foundation of representing information in bits, zeros, and ones. So you see the power of the simple insight in changing the world that we live in. Now, the first point I want to make with regard to the digital transformation is that there is nothing inevitable about where it lands us. So we have to discard this notion that somehow technology is extraneous, external to our experiences as humans, as societies, and we are kind of flowing with this stream. And the direction of it is set by a few corporations or a few geographies, etc. So this issue of technology not being external to our experience, technology being a human construct, a socially constructed paradigm, is very, very important to managing the digital transformation. And how so? Because we need to preserve and enhance human agency. We need to preserve and enhance the public policy space in addressing all aspects of this transformation. Just to give you one example, what you highlighted in that slide in terms of potential recommendations, this aspect of digital inclusion, leaving no one behind, which is one of the mantras in the SDGs space. So if the digital transformation ends up benefiting only a few people, ends up creating further power imbalances within societies and across the globe, then it'll be unstable. And it is not only morally unacceptable, but it's also unstable and unsustainable in the long run. It'll lead to social unrest as jobs shift. It'll lead to other difficulties for politicians. So it's in our interest to make sure that this transformation is inclusive and the digital divide does not widen further. There is an existing digital divide. Just to cite a figure, 2.7 billion people are not connected. Even those who are connected, their experience on the internet may not be meaningful, may not be affordable, may not be relevant to their context. And in some cases, that experience may be a negative experience. So women in particular face a lot of online abuse, so gender-based violence. Women politicians are more likely to be targeted with online hate speech. So it kind of inhibits them from participating fully in the benefits of the digital transformation. So this issue of exclusion and conversely inclusion is a crucial issue in terms of the public policy aspects of managing the digital transformation. Now, I could give other examples, but in the interest of time, I'll just limit myself to this example and come quickly to what we are doing at the UN. You mentioned the work on the Global Digital Compact in the context of the Summit of the Future next year. So this summit has been called for by the General Assembly on the recommendation of the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who in his Our Common Agenda report proposed a series of measures to transform multilateralism, to reboot multilateralism at a time when we face these global challenges, including the triple planetary challenge of loss of biodiversity, environmental pollution, and accelerating climate change. So the digital track is one of the tracks to the Summit of the Future. So digital technologies in terms of its policy, international policy aspects have been elevated to a summit level track. And this track is supposed to result in a common document called the Global Digital Compact, which would set out some shared principles so that this digital future is open, free, secure, inclusive. It would also set out, hopefully, some priorities for action, a common action framework, because we have to move from principles to practice. And finally, hopefully, it would also land in the practice of not only governments, but also the private sector. The digital space is multi-stakeholder, so private sector, international organizations, civil society, and the tech community have to participate in shaping this digital future. On the education side, my good friend Shankar will and others on the panel would go into that in detail. So I limit myself to just saying that we've had the Transforming Education Summit last September in New York. There is a crisis in education post-COVID. Hundreds of millions have been kind of left out of mainstream education. Even today, close to 100 million don't attend school, and several hundred million more don't have the kind of quality education that is needed for the digital age. Our friend from Kenya will go into STEM, and it is much more than STEM. We need a new kind of literacy for everyone so that misinformation, disinformation does not delude us, does not destabilize our societies and our polities. So that education challenge is larger. And there again, we have to be careful not thinking of tech as a solution to deep problems. So if we don't have functioning schools, if we don't have trained teachers, if we don't have toilets for girls, digital technologies are not going to change things, are they? So it is an enabler, but it has to be thought of carefully. And another point in your slide about digital public goods, digital public infrastructure, that's perhaps one of the ways in which technology can be used wisely to address key SDG areas like education, health, the green transition, and agriculture and food security. All of these areas I know are very close to Amma's heart and the work that is inspired by her example. To conclude, there is a values dimension to this work, and you can call it ethical approaches. You can call it compassion-based approaches. You can call it human-centric digital transformation. But I think at the end of the day, our human values, our common humanity has to inform the way forward. Often there is lack of clarity about the direction of technology and its impact. So there, if we can remember our basic humanity, we are less likely to get lost. As Mahatma Gandhi said, whenever you are in doubt, think of the poorest, most wretched person you've met and ask yourself what you're going to do. Is that going to help that person in terms of that person's empowerment? It's not charity, it's about empowerment, and that's the true meaning of human development, as Amartya Sen has so eloquently reminded us. So I think values have a role, compassion has a role, and I hope the C20 group's work led by Amma this year, it's a unique leadership. You don't often see spiritual leaders leading such efforts, and I think it was time. So it's a unique opportunity again to bring that ethical, values-based, human-centric, empowering perspective to these discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amandeep, Ambassador Gill. This is quite inspiring, and I really like. Thank you for this, for conveying these messages. Also, you know, from your point of view, where you tend to have quite an overview of what's happening, to the extent that is even possible. But this will indeed inspire us. Just to build on this, I would like to give the word to Dr. Shankar now, who maybe brings in I think you've been discussing in the past, but maybe bring a very specific focus on a more applied way, in the way this can play out for the education space in particular. So Dr. Shankar, the floor is yours. Actually, I have some good news and some bad news. Actually, unfortunately, Dr. Behara will not be able to join. So we have a little bit more time. So don't be rushed. Take your time, please.
Thank you, Dr. Monks. And following Ambassador Gill is always a tough act. And but nevertheless, let me jump in. Ekstep Foundation is a not-for-profit. We represent the voice of the civil society. What I'm talking about now will be based on our extensive experiences of working in India, of working with diverse stakeholders, including central and state governments, other civil society actors, even interacting with for-profit technology players. India, as we are all aware, has made rapid strides in digitizing, has made rapid strides in becoming a digital society. So the question is, what happens when a society becomes digital? How do we prepare for it? And if a digital society is all about innovating and progressing, where does the role of inclusion and equity come in? How can the global South leverage technology? How can the global South leverage the increasing digitization of society to leapfrog? In fact, to catch up on the setback created by COVID in reaching our 2030 SDG goals. And as we dwelt on this problem of education in India, we have 260 million children across 1.5 million schools, close to 10 million teachers. Not only is the problem vast, massive scale, but it is also the diversity of India, the administrative complexity, in addition to the complex nature of education itself. It takes more than a decade, 15 years, to transform a young child into a confident teenager. And it takes the whole society to come together. Many countries have stumbled on their path of digital transformation. But in some ways, India seems to have avoided some of those traps. How did it do that? In the next few minutes, I will talk about the India experience and from there abstract some learnings for C20, especially as we are working on the report. Given the scale and complexity, what India set out to do is not to create a tech solution. What India set out to do is not to think technology first. The starting point was the policies and the programs and the intent. We had the National Education Policy of 2020, and even before that, many other policies around how to think digital. And as Ambassador Gill said, the starting point has to keep the child at the center, human-centered design. So the question is, how do we see technology enabling, amplifying, connecting the teachers? How can technology increase access to learning resources for the child? Increase access to learn professional development opportunities for the teacher in their local language, in their convenience. The starting point was not technology, not software, not hardware, not all the constraints. The starting point was, what is it that we already have an abundance of in India? The starting point was, how do we break up the complex nature of education into more simpler tasks? Just as if you want to solve the problem of transportation, you don't start by building cars. You start by thinking of highways, national highways, state highways, local highways. You think of mobility options like cars. You have to think about fuel points. You have to think about policies. The equivalent of that in technology was what India worked on. And as Ekstep Foundation, we were privileged and fortunate enough to partner with the government of India, many of the state organizations, to create a technology blueprint. And using that blueprint to create a set of digital public goods. These were initially philanthropically created by Ekstep Foundation, but the rest of the community joined in. The government also was a major participant. So we created the equivalent of the highways, digital public goods, a bunch of technology building blocks It's the equivalent of if you want to create 1,000,000 houses, you start by asking what is a house fundamentally? It's a composition of bricks, cement, paint, roof, tiles, doors, windows. So if each of these are created separately as building blocks, then it's easy for a country to create 1,000,000 and 1,000,000,000 houses. Because everybody wants their own, as Ambassador Gill said, they want to have the agency of creating their own house, their own solution. And in education, given how each child is unique, every state, every district wants its own unique thing. So we created digital building blocks. On top of these building blocks, a national platform called Diksha, which stands for Digital Infrastructure for Knowledge Sharing, was created by the government of India. And this is important, as a central infrastructure for a decentralized use. It's the equivalent of the center can build national highways, the state then builds state highways and then local roads. Diksha in turn became a digital public infrastructure on which many states build their own solutions in their own language, their own content, their own pedagogy, their own curriculum. This approach of federal leadership, intense cooperation without violating administrative boundaries was a 5-year journey. And where that we are now is Diksha has clocked in, I think, more than 60 billion minutes of learning. The data is available on the website. It has content in more than 34 languages, including 10 Indian dialects, tribal languages, where without this, the languages cannot be taught in the local language. There's content in local tribal languages, 230,000 pieces of content, reach of anywhere upwards of 180 million children, 7 million teachers. There's a lot of usage, but that's not the point. The point is, this is just the start. This infrastructure in turn, with another policy called National Digital Education Architecture, launched in 2021, is allowing the whole country to think about how can the collective wisdom and contribution of a network come together, such that if a building block is built once, it is put out as a public good, other states can take it. So this is still work in progress, but the exciting thing is this cooperation is extending beyond India. India in turn has put Diksha out as a digital public good for anybody in the world to take and use. No strings attached. And in turn, India is helping other countries like Mauritius. And there are conversations between government, multilateral agencies, and Africa on how India's experience can be leveraged by others. So I see this as a very inspiring example of a global cooperation where we are all stronger when we come together. Of course, like anything in India, once it is successful, the numbers are staggering. But it's in the design of this where there's been a lot of learning, multiple stakeholders coming together, data becoming a language for exchange of information. And as Ambassador Gill said, the starting point is technology is merely a social human construct. It is not that technology alone shapes society, but society's aspirations and concerns in turn shape technology. And there have been a lot of wonderful innovations. The humble textbook becoming a very powerful, trusted window into the world of digital resources for teachers and children alike, because that was what was abundant in India. So, Dr. Monks, I'll stop here and maybe continue in the next session on the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, rickshaw as a global public good in the field of education is maybe a benchmark that we want to identify, or that we have already identified, as this is also part of our work to see what kind of udarans, to use the Hindi term, if that is correct, can we sort of share and inspire the G20 and C20 with. Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll get back to this, but I would like to give the floor now to Mr. Eric Niamvaro from Kenya to share his insights from the field, if I may say, in Africa. Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jost, for this opportunity, and thank you to my fellow panelists, Ambassador Gill and Dr. Shankar, for the insightful remarks. I'll just follow up on Dr. Shankar's sentiments after hearing the views shared. And I come from the part of sharing the practices from Nairobi, Kenya, and probably extrapolate them to the wider sub-Saharan Africa in terms of this topic of discussion. Now, I work at the STEM Impact Center, where we try to promote STEM activities in schools. And therefore, my insights are really based from a very practical experiences drawn from the most extreme places, what we would call the most left behind, to all the way to the urban city, which could be an urban city in any part of the world. But just to really give a very practical example, in our country, we do have a new government that came in place. We had elections in October. So we do have a pretty young government that is less than 6 months old. And the president the new president has a PhD. So for the first time also, we do have a president who's very strong in academia and research, so to speak. A few weeks ago, he gave the Minister for ICT 6 months to digitize all government services, which are about 5,000 of them, so that in 6 months, all those government services are digitized. At the moment, we have about 300 of those services that are digitized. And he held the first paperless cabinet meeting 2 weeks ago. Coupled on this is, as a country, Kenya, we are undergoing education reforms. When he came to power, he did establish what we call a presidential working party on education reforms to look at the entire of our education system and propose ways in which we need to move forward as a country. So layering on those points, there is an agenda of digitization that is not unique to Kenya, but to Africa as a whole. And this is backed up by strategies, like we have the Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa that is ratified by the AU to be implemented across African governments. And layering on that digital transformation strategy globally, we saw Biden also launching an initiative on digital transformation for Africa that is very fresh and focusing on aspects of expanding the digital access, strengthening the enabling environment. But that's not the end. We also have the digital skill road by China, and of course the EU Digital for Development Hub. So from a global scale, we see the interest in Africa on this agenda of digitization. But when now we drill down to my country, Kenya, we do have what we call an ICT master plan, a broadband strategy master plan that is trying to make sense of digitization to the lowest normal person, what we the new government calls the approach bottom up, beginning with the person at the base of the pyramid. The benefits of digitization are very clear and I think are well elaborated. The policies are equally very good. In fact, when I read our policies on be it the ICT master plan, be it the broadband strategy for the country, they are all very good. And from the global strategies all the way to the African content strategies to the country strategies, they're very good alignment. They are all speaking on the issue of enabling environment, all of them. They are all speaking on policy and regulation. They are all speaking about infrastructure. They are all speaking about capacity. So I feel in my space where I sit, the policies we have are very robust. On the practice part, however, is really where we have a huge gap. And I was very encouraged to listen to Dr. Shankar on how you went about it in India. I think in this part of the country, we went for the hardware first, informed by what Ambassador Gill, what are the values of all this whole process? So if the values are not right, then maybe we will go to where maybe the most quick money is, which is the infrastructure. But hopefully we've learned this and really emphasize on the values. So from here in Kenya, we run STEM programs across schools, and the further away you move from the capital city, just like in many other jurisdictions, you will find that the dual challenge of connectivity remains. Connectivity to internet and connectivity to, of course, electricity. They all remain a challenge. And with the new curriculum that is competence-based, that is being scaled across the country, this dual component of connectivity becomes a very core focus of delivering the new curriculum. So much so that in ways where schools are not connected to the mains or through any other means of energy, most likely they will not have internet. And when you look through the curriculum that speaks of digital literacy, which is part and parcel of the curriculum, then they miss on that gap. And since maybe we started with technology first, then now we came to train teachers later, that also brings about very, very serious challenges, so much so that teachers just skip that topic and move on to what they're used to. So in the urban cities, I think there's very much progress, but again, within the urban cities, the informal settlements, the challenge remains. The challenge about how the schools, for example, can they afford the OPEX for the connectivity. I just came from a field where I'm doing a research on sustainable models of internet connectivity in schools. And this is informed by the good work that UNICEF and GIGA have done in connecting some of the schools to the internet. But now we are moving beyond that and asking, so beyond this, how can they sustainably keep on paying for the operational costs, given that what the government gives in forms of capitation is very, very minimal, that you cannot be able to afford for the schools to pay for them to enjoy the benefits of the internet. And what's coming up through preliminary is the aspect of community, and now moving also towards what could be the recommendation. The aspect of community internet providers is really something that is coming up very well. How do we empower communities at that very local level so that the state maybe drops the main connection to a given point, then it's taken up by different community enterprises, and who then will go on to connect the schools and other community members. So that's really one thing that probably you could see the role of community internet providers in powering what we call this digitization agenda in a very, very sustainable way. We've tried out a mechanism where this government has provided free internet in market spaces, in stadia, whereas that starts off very well. 1 year down the line, everything collapses. And again, back to Shankara's, is what is the process of onboarding some of those very beautiful initiatives? So if, for example, you give people free internet Wi-Fi, maybe without the capacity for them, without programs that they can use to make use of that internet, then again, the issues of risk comes in place in terms of what are they exactly using that internet for. So a strong believer that on the powers of connectivity and digitization, for sure, we have seen the power that it has. a very classic example in my country is that the government rolled out what they call a hustler fund. It's a digital lending platform by the government. When they came to office, there were these all private people who are lending people at very exorbitant interest rates. And the president had promised to create a fund for any ordinary person with very minimum interest rates. And in less than actually 3 months since the fund was launched, we have about 18.8 million who have registered on that platform. And they have so far had about 30 million transactions. And this is at the comfort of any very basic mobile phone, which then again let the president start saying, if we can do this in a very short time, what more can we do if we were to have as many citizens as possible on the digital platforms? And that has made his call for digitizing of government services, but also much later then on board other services that the citizens can enjoy. But so quickly,
yeah, Mr. May I ask you to wrap up, please, so that we still have another 15 minutes to carry on, please.
Okay, so I was actually going to move on to what I see as some of the areas that we could base some of our recommendations on. Maybe then I can hold on that, then I can give that in the next 15 minutes.
No, please go ahead. But maybe just keep it short.
Okay, thank you. The first thing is that, and Dr. Jill talked about this meaningful internet. And when we look at the policy documents, the African strategy has described this as 6 Mbps per any single user. And in terms of the price they've given as 1 cent of per USD per MB as aspirational, but the reality on the ground is that still this is out of touch with a lot of people to afford. So remember, the issues of affordability, accessibility, and reliability remain a core challenge to a lot of people, millions of young people in Kenya and Africa. And therefore, any recommendation we have should be able to speak on those very 3 core aspects of affordability, of accessibility, and of reliability. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Eric. This is very interesting. Before maybe taking 1 or 2 questions from the audience, is there any of the panel participants that would like to react to each other, which is always an important aspect of this kind of panels? Any reactions or, elements that you would like to emphasize also in terms of informing our policy work?
Yeah, Dr. Monks, I had a thought reflecting on what Eric said. When you're looking at cooperation within a country across various stakeholders, government, civil society, across countries, and thinking of digital transformation and technology, it is very important to understand that no 2 countries have the same context. So the idea of taking a solution from one and transplanting it versus cooperating on the building blocks, cooperating on design, so that one country is inspired by another, but yet it's implementing in the context of its policies, its infrastructure, its requirements, what society at that point wants. I think this is an important differentiator, right? And otherwise, it is a tech-led solution, and a UNICEF report talked about how after pandemic, 1/3 of national digital platforms are either stagnant or shut down. Because it's easy to go down the path of technology and then get stuck, right? So I think what Eric talked about, and with so many countries, I want to reiterate a human and society first approach, approach of cooperation, an approach of leveraging what each other has built, especially if they're not full solutions, if they are components of solution. For example, content created in one country on STEM could be used in another, translated and used. A piece of technology in one could be used. Technological capacity in one country could be offered. learnings and data research could be offered, right? And organizations like UN can provide that platform for us to come together. Platforms like C20 can provide that cooperation mechanisms. So I think that's why, as Ambassador Gill said, this is both a unique and a very important track of C20 within the global larger G20 framework.
Thank you, Dr. Shankar. I was about to say the same, but you already said it. Ambassador Gill, would you like to react?
Sure. Just a couple of thoughts following what Eric and Shankar have said. I think Eric correctly highlighted that if you get into the hardware paradigm, you create these vendor dependencies. And there are so many horror stories of these computers just lying locked up in the principal's office in a school because, the technician is not there to maintain them. And the skills are not there to use them properly. Sometimes electricity is not available. So starting with just hardware is the wrong end of the stick. You need hardware, but you can't have a hardware-centric strategy. And you have to invest in people. The human side is the most important. And then you need these collaborative platforms because look at the analog world. Teachers talk to each other. They come together, they share lesson plans, and platforms like Diksha allow you to do those things. So that's a wiser approach to bring digital technologies into the education domain. Now, coming to the G20 setting, the digital side is one of the three priorities of the Indian G20 presidency, alongside the financing of SDGs, and environment, the LIFE initiative. So it is, again, an interesting opportunity. And within the digital paradigm, there is a digital for development discussion. There is a digital economy discussion. There is a digital public goods, digital public infrastructure discussion. So all these strands are coming together at a nice time. So if the C20 community can come up with recommendations that reinforce some of these important human-centric transformation themes: inclusion, the multi-stakeholder character, co-creation, collaboration, human capacity building, particularly of teachers. And also, I think because we are speaking of education, there's an opportunity to teach digital skills differently to children. For instance, I spoke of the gender divide, and Dr. Prema is here. So if you bring STEM education, mathematics, differently into the classroom, girls are likely to take it up much more than if you bring computer science in mathematics class. So computer science concepts need not be taught in mathematics class. They can be taught in the languages or humanities class. Data science concepts can be introduced at a young age. How do we categorize things? How do we categorize other people and what risks there are? So I think it's an opportunity to reinvent some of the ways in which we approach STEM education, digital literacy also, because the world in front of us, where you have generative AI, ChatGPT, there's been a lot of talk about its power, but it's also its limitations, which are quite a few. So we need a different kind of understanding in schools that goes beyond coding. I think that is another aspect that the community can look at.
Many rich ideas, and also a lot of challenge for us, and an opportunity, as you say, Ambassador Gill Amandeep, under Amma's chairmanship, to bring out these human-centered, these value-based, these compassion-based perspectives. Noting, as you say, technology is a human construct, but sometimes we have the impression that we're surpassed, we're surpassed by technology. And that is a risk. And the other element that you mentioned is that cooperative. I mean, the digital space, digital technology, digital economy is very much marked by this winner takes it all. There's just a few players that dominate. If that continues, then it will never be sustainable. So actually, I have two questions from the audience, and I'll keep the very exciting one for the last one. The first question resonates with what was just said, and this issue of sustainability. Technology evolves day by day, and the existing trend goes outdated quite quickly. What should be a suitable measure to ensure sustainability in digital infrastructures, libraries, especially when the initiatives are hardware centered? So what are elements to ensure sustainability for this kind of initiatives? Maybe the rickshaw, rickshaw, that's the right pronunciation, offers some guidance here. Dr. Shankar?
Yeah, actually that's Diksha with a D as in Delhi, Diksha. So in fact, as we were thinking of designing this, we converted the problem into an opportunity. Technology is fast changing. Take advantage of it, right? And that's where a building block approach comes in. A mobile phone, as an example, is a composition of many fancy technologies. Each year, each of those technology gets upgraded. But the end result is every year we get a better phone. So if you think of Diksha as a set of building blocks, each of those building blocks is getting better. If there is a better building block, you swap this out and get that in. No different from if there's a better tire technology, you don't change your car. You just swap it out and get the better tire. So when you think of it with this design construct, it's actually ChatGPT-3 is an advantage and not a limitation, because you didn't start with hardware and software. You started with a human-centric design. You started by asking what can make the teacher better? What can provide the child more access to learning resources? So the design can actually enable leveraging the fast innovation to solve for inclusion, rather than countries getting paralyzed by the fast changing nature of innovation and technology. So Diksha, therefore, is a composition. As each building block improves or something else comes along, it's added on top.
Thank you.
So that's how we're tackling it in India.
Very good. You wanted to add something here, Ambassador Gill? Yes, please, you're unmuted.
I just, perhaps to illustrate this, the point that Shankar is making, take an example from the financial field. How does this building block approach, the stack approach work? Today you have in the developing world, close to 1 billion who are not in the financial mainstream. They don't have bank accounts, credit cards. They can't participate in the digital economy. So if you create a means whereby a person, the basic thing for a bank is know the customer. You know, who are you? So that there's no fraud, there's no scam. So through digital identity, you can create a very low-cost way of establishing who you are. So that's a basic foundational stack. And then on top of that, if you have a mechanism whereby payment flows can happen digitally, which is not just connecting the banks, but it's connecting individual customers. They may have 1 account, 2 accounts, 3 accounts. So there should be a way for a low-cost flow of information related to financial transaction that's secure, that's interoperable. So that's another stack, in a sense, another set of building blocks. And you can have different ways of building those two together. And then on top of that, you can have products and services, whether it is loans, small loans that are made to, let's say, a vegetable seller or a small shopkeeper, working capital, 500 rupees, you know, $5, $10. And because of those stacks, those building blocks, the transaction costs come down, and these kind of customers become bankable. So there's a boost to financial inclusion. So just as we've taken the education example, you can have it in the financial space. You can similarly think of these products in the agriculture space. That's the transformation side of digital transformation. But if it is pursued only through hardware, it's ATM machines, for instance, if it is pursued only through a commercial lens, just a few companies making those products, etc., then you miss out on a large section of the population, which developing countries cannot afford. The market works differently in the global north. So there is enough slack in an economy like Switzerland, the analog slack, to take care of these issues. But that slack doesn't exist in the global south.
Many issues here.
In fact,
yeah,
sorry,
Dr.
just
Shankar,
10
please,
seconds, Dr.
please.
Monks.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just sharing a link on the chat, which I wrote a paper on this, on building blocks across sectors for digital transformation. For the benefit of this audience, you can read that later. It's a public article. Just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much. Actually, we're running out of time, and I appreciate that you're still all with us. But there's a final question, which is a bit a wishful question, I would say, which came on our chat, and I want to read it out to you. And this is maybe more like I have a dream perspective, but it would be a nice way to conclude this very rich day. So the question basically is, so what needs to be done, or how can digital transformation be deployed to have 100% literacy at global level, healthcare for all, attitude for environment, love and compassion? Maybe the ask is too big, but this is a little bit like, if we would have a magic stick, how could we use technology in a responsible and human-centered way to contribute to these objectives of education, health, but also humankind? I always feel like saying, digital technology or AI calls for our humanity. So how can we use the technology for the best benefit of humanity? Maybe just some thoughts, and then we can conclude. Maybe I want to start with Eric. Would you have a first go at this question?
I really think this boils down to, there was an earlier commitment on action on foundational learning globally, that if we can make all our children by age 10, that they are able to read and write, then what follows up as the very most sustainable foundation of transforming the futures of our world is by focusing on foundational learning. And as Dr. Jill earlier on said, we don't have to teach coding hardcore, but if you look at, even in our traditional societies, there's STEM in that. How can that be taught with that early grade learner? So that as they evolve up, as they come up, then it will be easy for them to adapt to what is coming up on them. So that would be my take.
Who wants to go next, if you feel called to this question, obviously?
Yeah, just a quick sentence. I think the sustainability dimension, which we couldn't discuss today, is very, very important. And this question highlights that not just the e-waste energy consumption side of digital, but also resources like metals like lithium, but also the opportunity where we can use data to track point sources of pollution. We can build better resilience, early warning systems, climate change triggered disasters, for instance. So again, it's a wise course that once our values are rightly chosen, and we've from values we move to principles, and from principles we move to action, then we can do this. Thank you.
The final word?
Dr. Monks, if I had a dream, it is that in a digital society, we have progressed from the current low trust, high cost systems, whether it be in education, health, to a high trust, low cost, where cooperation, collaboration happens through structured digital interactions, proper governance, And therefore, what currently costs $100 for the poor to access can be made available at a cent. So in this, we're looking at an inversion from a lot of cost needed to establish trust in cooperation to very low cost of establishing trust and therefore access to everyone. That is how I believe we can leverage innovation to solve equity, leverage progress to solve for inclusion. Thank you.
These are wonderful concluding remarks. I don't want to add much more to that. So thank you very much for this very rich and inspiring panel. I think we got quite a few takeaways. I'm not making an effort to repeat again what was said. I think you, in your concluding remarks, I think there were key items that were highlighted and then we'll be happy to pick up. So that brings us actually to the end of our panel sessions. We will now have a final concluding short session actually with Dr. Prema, just sharing with you where we move from now. So before we go there, my deepest thanks to the panelists of our last panel on digital transformation for sharing your insights and having your advice. We will certainly come back to you once we start writing up our white paper in a more detailed way. But I think some key points will certainly inform us. So Dr. Prema, I think this brings us to the last part of our day.
Yes, thank you. I'll start with what Ambassador Gill said, values to principles to actions. That was beautifully said. And one of our sub-themes is education for life, to actually propose including such value-based curriculum, service research, service learning-based curriculum, formally into the curriculum. And besides the open platforms and the data sets, from our side also, when we talk to some of the NGOs in Africa and other countries, we felt we could very well align with our government in terms of the digital ID and the direct transfer to the beneficiaries. Because what we heard is that there is a lot of fund, but it does not always reach the beneficiary in many other countries. And so implementing this in India, we feel has been a major, and obvious benefit. We can see the change, and it's definitely something we would recommend from the C20. That's what we've been hearing. And Dr. Gill, it was very nice to hear from you about the C20 important items. We did go to the G20 Digital Economy workshop in Lucknow, but then these other ones are also valuable. Inclusion and digital accessibility is definitely part of our work, both for disability and for those who require access. Coming to Dr. Shankar's point, yes, Diksha is an amazing platform. We have used it ourselves, and one of our very large projects was actually now on Diksha. And through that, we are also able to offer it to other countries. Another example on similar lines is the Umang platform, Unified Mobile Application for New Age Governance. So there are other projects like this that bring a lot of all the services possible into one unified platform, pan-India e-governance services, and all such practices. And as you said, the building blocks. The building blocks can be replicated or offered to other countries. And then from Eric, yes, it was very interesting to hear that in Kenya, there are very good new policies and how there is the huge gap of the practice. Obviously, access, affordability, free Wi-Fi, all of that are very important to get it to practice. And that's exactly what we want to be learning to incorporate it into our C20 policy documents. In fact, we have even heard some things that may not be discussed at the government level. For example, we have heard NGOs and civil societies that are working with refugees on asking, could there be something digital that connects us so we know whom to help them? Where are the refugees? How do we help them? And the refugees know where to get the services. So something like that does not exist at all, and probably would never come up in the ministerial deliberations, but it is very much coming from the Civil 20 voice from other countries. And so those are also items we are looking for guidance on, how and what what are the solutions. Maybe as civil society, maybe we could build something for them and probably show it as an actual implementation during this year itself. Yes, I think that was it. Thank you very much. I think this was just an amazing panel, from the UN. I have looked at the digital commons and all the proposals that have been submitted so far. And also with Ek Step, amazing work, not just on Diksha, but even coming up with the digital ID idea and how to go about it. And Eric, very excellent inputs from Kenya, we heard. And we hope that we can incorporate all that you said properly into our level 0 policy document, and we will share it with you for your inputs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Prema. Maybe just to conclude, thank you for wrapping the panel up. Just the previous slide, just to let you know where we take this from here in terms of the timeline. So basically, we're working on the concept note, and that will be another long day ahead of us. Actually, prepare this for tomorrow, from what I have heard. A number of webinars, meetings being already planned, as highlighted at the very beginning of the workshops today. There will be an important meeting coming up in Surat, in Gujarat, on the 21st of May, where we basically want to validate our white paper, main recommendations, and follow up on that. Then we will work in particular, as it was mentioned, also on identifying a good practice, udarans, in terms of highlighting, showcasing examples that exemplify our recommendations. And the final policy brief will be due at the C20 summit, which will take place in Jaipur end of July. So that's our time path. It still looks like there's a lot of time, but there is not that much time. So we will keep the momentum up, and we're very happy with the momentum that we were able to create today. And as said, with your permission, we will certainly come back to you once we have draft documents to be shared with you, and to receive the blessing of your advice and expertise in guiding us writing these up. So that being said, I think thank you so much again. I think a lot of our panelists, as we started very early this morning already, have already left. But this is our general thanks to the audience and the participants for taking your Sunday on working with us and inspiring us in our work that is inspired by Amma and the message that we seek to convey under the banner of compassion in action. So that would be the final word on my side. Anything you want to add here, Prema? If not,
no, that's all. We invite everybody to our physical event in Surat and at Nagpur.
Thank you so much, everybody. Wishing you a wonderful day. And we'll be in touch soon again. Oh, no, sorry. There was one thing. We need to take a picture, right, Dr. Prema? Oh, can I please ask all participants to very briefly turn on their cameras so we take a picture of our panel here? Sorry for forgetting that. Please, everybody, just see some familiar faces here. That's good to see. Amal, you let us know when you're done.
Sure, sir.
Is everybody still there? Maybe some of our panelists have already left. Okay.
Yes, we are done, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that being said, thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful Sunday, and we'll be in touch soon again. Namah Shivaya. Thank you. Goodbye.